Hi, folks.
Hi, Jared. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank
Absolutely.
you
Excellent.
for joining us. Are you in Washington or are you in California?
I am in Marin County, and you're welcome to call me Congressman Jared, whatever you'd like.
Okay, well, I welcome to the Oak Leaf. Our editorial board committee is actually a smaller group of this that are going to be doing the endorsements. That would be Michael, Alex Fuller, and James DeMizio, Stephen, Jonathan Bigall, and I think that's it. But
Nick's not here.
the rest are here for the show.
Oh, the
And we
show.
have some questions for you after, but we're going to ask, first we're going to ask the endorsement questions that we're asking all of the candidates, and then we'll open it up a little bit. Jonathan is going to be your questioner today. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Jonathan.
I prefer the
Great.
term interrogator. I'm kidding. How are
I
you
like
doing
it.
today, Congressman?
I'm doing great. You all, we'll try to make this show worthwhile for those that are just here for the show, and it's great to be with you. I'm sorry we're not able to do it in person, but glad that you are keeping the flame of journalism lit, and happy to be part of this conversation.
No pun intended with that flame, huh?
Yeah, well, sadly.
Yeah. So, first on my list of questions for you, Congressman, is what makes you more qualified than your opponent? I believe Congressman, or not Congressman, Mr. Menser. What makes you more qualified than your opponent to hold this position in Congress?
Well, you know, I've had this position for 8 years, and the fact that the voters have rehired me several times now, I think sort of establishes that qualification piece. I'll let you take a look at Mr. Mensing's qualifications and decide whether you think he meets the bar. But I think I've already shown that I can do this job, and that's the short answer to your first question.
Okay. I like that, keeping it simple. For my second question, regarding the last, the fever dream that has been the last 6 months, or I guess if you count all the way up to, what was it, November of 2019, how do you think the country should respond to the pandemic health-wise at this point?
Yeah, well, for me, I think the fever dream really began in November of 2016, and has just taken a sort of weird psychedelic turn for the last 6 months or so. But how do I think the country should respond, or if we could do it all over again, what would we have done differently? Well, several really, really important things. First of all, even before February, when we began to get word about the severity of this pandemic that was breaking out in China, we had dismantled a lot of public health infrastructure in this country. And we had gone a long way towards sowing the seeds of distrust of science and of government institutions. And a lot of these things that seemed like sort of recreational anti-government politics, but there's a real price to be paid when you undermine the professionalism and the competency and the public trust in these institutions. And all of that had happened, plus some very specific things like dismantling some of the on-the-ground monitors and experts that we would have had in China, and that had some of the pandemic response mechanisms that have been put in place by prior administrations. So I would start there. I wish we had not done all of those things. But then once the pandemic was sort of upon us, I think a series of mistakes ensued, starting with our testing strategy. Instead of accepting the proven test that the rest of the world was using, that was a perfectly good test, the CDC, for some reason, insisted on developing their very own from scratch. That took time. And there were false starts with it because mistakes were made, and it didn't happen quickly. It didn't happen smoothly. So we lost about 6 to 8 weeks at the most critical time when we should have been aggressively testing Now, President Trump, all he talks about is, I closed the border with China, which he really didn't do. What he did was he did a fairly ceremonial act of limiting flights from China while allowing thousands of people to continue going back and forth, and without acknowledging that the virus was already here, and it was already here mostly coming through Europe, which he was very late to address on the flight restrictions. So he just missed it in every possible way. Now, the testing stumbles that we saw at CDC were then compounded by a total lack of accountability from the administration. There was no one ever in charge of testing. There still isn't at the national level. There's no one person accountable for a national testing strategy. There was complete chaos when it came to not only the availability and who would be in charge of testing, but PPEs, whether that be the masks and gowns and gloves and ventilators or anything else that our medical professionals needed. There was a total lack of a national plan and a refusal, a stubborn one that I still don't understand to this day, to use this really powerful tool that we put in the law called the Defense Production Act, which is there precisely for crises like this to allow the government to go and take over manufacturing lines and say, we're just going to make enough of these damn masks or gowns or gloves or whatever you need to make sure there's no shortage and there's not price gouging and there's the ability to do what we need. None of that happened. So, I mean, I could go on for a long time. I've got a lot of criticisms of how our government dropped the ball in response to this pandemic. But I'll just mention one more, and that is, on top of all of these failures, there was a total lack of consistency in messaging. And when you need the public to step up and change behaviors at a critical point when you can still stop a pandemic, and you step on your own messaging, undermine it, trivialize the disease, and then ultimately politicize tools like mask wearing and social distancing, I mean, all of that combined to just make us by far the worst developed country in terms of our response, and we're paying the price.
All right. And where do you believe we should be heading at this point, or what actions do you believe we need to take?
Well,
now?
we're going to have to play catch up on all those things I just mentioned that we screwed up and more. So it's still not too late to address the testing and the PPE stockpiling and procurement problems, but that will eventually require the Defense Production Act to be invoked as part of a really coherent national strategy with specific points of accountability. None of that is in place right now. So we're just going to need new leaders. And you know, one would hope that if the Biden administration comes into power, that they'll do these things. I'm confident they will.
All righty. That's good to hear. I asked that question just to gauge whether or not you had some outside of the box, or not out of the box, but some more, I'm not sure how to word it, but just a different response. But I'm happy with that response. For my next question, and again, on the coronavirus topic. So the president benefited from socialized medicine when he was treated at Walter Reed for COVID-19. And the 210,000 people who died largely did not. How do you see fixing failures in our healthcare system that have emerged during this pandemic?
Well, it'd be great if everyone had a team of white-coated experts to take care of their every need when they're sick. And the president doesn't seem to get it. He is so tone deaf when it comes to what millions of Americans are struggling with in the face of this pandemic. So you know probably where I want to go on health policy and health insurance. I believe we should have national health insurance so everyone has coverage. And certainly in a pandemic like this, we ought to make sure not only that everyone can get tested for free, but that everyone can get treated if they have it. We have not been able to do all those things. And you know, we've kind of piecemealed our way a little bit towards it. We passed a bill called the CARES Act months ago, one of our early responses to this pandemic. And on a bipartisan basis, we actually decided that the government should provide free testing for everyone. That's a little bit of a baby step towards, you know, national health care or national health insurance. It at least recognizes that when it comes to identifying folks with this virus, we all have a common interest in it. We all have basic human rights. And we did it regardless of documentation status for immigrants. So that was kind of a big deal. Maybe we'll be able to build on that and the principle that it reflects, because we need more of our colleagues to understand that healthcare, really should be a human right. And this pandemic is kind of shining a bright light on, how these gaps and these inequities really hurt all of us.
Right. I can very much identify with that. My stepmom is a nurse at Sutter, and as soon as I get kicked out of my parents' house, I'll probably have to look for my own healthcare. So I don't know where else to go from there. I want to ask you, though, what is your take on a stimulus bill, and what do you think is needed to help the country financially during this pandemic?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen the breaking news on that, but the president just, of course, by tweet announced that he was terminating negotiations on any further pandemic legislation, the stimulus. So what I think is needed is something in the order of the HEROES Act, which we passed over 4 months ago, and it's a big piece of legislation. It's $3.5 trillion, and what it would do is provide support for state and local governments. When we tell people, go back to school, tell teachers go back in the classroom, it's not that simple. It costs a lot of money to make classrooms safe. There's all sorts of facilities. I mean, you guys are studying remotely right now. You know what I'm talking about. But there's all kinds of facility investments and personnel investments and equipment that will be needed to make our classrooms safe for students and staff. And we're not providing any help. So that's a big part of why we're pushing this money through for state and local governments, or we're trying to at least. We included in that funding for the Postal Service, because in a pandemic, we rely even more heavily on the Postal Service than normally. Plus, we have this election, coming up in less than a month, and we have to make sure that people can vote safely in a pandemic like this, and that's where the Postal Service is so vital. There were other aspects of the HEROES Act. I don't need to go through every bit of it, but that $3.5 trillion bill is what I believe is appropriate. It includes the enhanced unemployment benefits, the Paycheck Protection Program extension and improvements to help small businesses, and a number of other nutrition assistance, a number of other priorities.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, what would you do specifically if reelected, to help college students like the 17 of us in here finance their education?
So I think there's two pieces to that. We need to try to make education itself more affordable. And to me, that means providing more grants in aid, in part, rather than have people depend on loans so heavily. Our Pell Grant program has not kept up with the pace of inflation, so we just need to invest in that and get the numbers up on grants. I think we need to look also at tuition, and maybe even the antitrust aspects of tuitions. Tuitions have just skyrocketed all over this country, more than the cost of inflation, and it does not make sense to me. So at a minimum, we need to do what President Obama started to do but didn't finish in his second term. He was going to try to put together this almost like a shopping tool for young people, so that they could look at colleges and universities and really compare apples to apples, the tuition numbers and what you get for those numbers, including what you get after you graduate in terms of job placement rates and alumni support, all of these different measures, so we could make more informed decisions. And then more transparency from colleges about why their tuitions are set the way they are. I wouldn't be opposed to antitrust investigations, though, because it seems like the colleges and universities seem to raise their tuitions together. And that is like a red flag that there's a little bit of price fixing going on, and that they maybe should not be doing it that way. But then the last piece I'll say is when people do need to borrow money for student loans, we need to make those loans affordable. We have almost zero interest rates right now. There's no reason anyone should be getting student loans at 8, 10, or 12% interest in this day and age. And if they do have loans like that, we ought to give them a chance to refinance them at these really low interest rates. And I think that'll go a long way. Student debt is just a huge kind of overhang on our economy right now. And it could get really bad as we go further into this recession.
Huh. All right. So you worked on the Wildfire Defense Act with, of course, our Senator Kamala Harris and prospective Vice President of the United States of America. So I can sort of gauge your response to this next question, but I'd like for you to still give us your full take on, given the fires that have dotted the West Coast, both California and Oregon, and extreme weather across the country, how would you address climate change, especially considering how many experts are saying it's too late now? And if so, specifically, can you address how you could help with management of federal forests in California?
Yeah, so it's two slightly different questions. So I have a lot to say about how to address climate change, and it will include some of our natural systems and our public lands and our forest management practices. That's got to be part of the toolbox, but it's a lot more than that. So let's come back to that. On forest management, you know, right now as we're reeling from these fires and everybody seems to acknowledge that we have more forest management work to do, I think it's really important to understand the false solutions that are being suggested by some people, whether that is raking the forest floor, which is like not even a real thing, or if it is this kind of dusted off agenda that's been around for years to blow open our environmental laws and have a whole bunch of commercial scale logging in the backcountry of our forests, including old growth forests. None of those things are going to make us safer, and none of them are going to really help with the climate piece of the challenge as well. What will make us safer is trying to hurry up and catch up on 100 years of poor forest management, which largely involves suppressing fires every time we see one and not reintroducing fires into the natural system the way Native Americans did, the way for thousands of years it just used to work. So we've built up fuel loads that are totally dangerous, and it is not just state land. We need to educate President Trump on this. It's on U.S. Forest Service land. But here's the thing, it's also on private forest land. So, you know, when people try to say, oh, our government just can't manage forest land and we need to log just like private forest lands do, you've got catastrophic fires right now ripping through private forest lands that are heavily cut over in Oregon and parts of California. When you get these conditions in place, these hot, dry conditions exacerbated by climate change, that fire is going to come through like a blowtorch, and it doesn't care who owns the land or really even what it looks like or whether it's been logged before. It's all going to burn. So let's manage our forests, but let's be smart about how we do it. That's what the bill you mentioned tries to do, that I'm doing with Kamala Harris. It provides the ability for each community to prioritize how it wants to spend its wildfire mitigation grants. Some places may want to do vegetation management. Some might want to invest in their energy grid and to do microgrids to address possible power outages. Some might want to update their evacuation plans and things like that. This is going to be a different, resiliency is going to look a little different, you know, in different areas and in different communities. I'm going to keep opposing proposals to blow holes in our environmental laws, because this is just a Trojan horse for commercial logging. It's not an answer to fire resiliency or to healthy forests. But there are some places where we can do some thoughtful, selective logging, and especially in areas that we've referred to as roadside shaded fuel breaks. The place where fires really get out of control is when they burn quickly up into the canopy of trees. And in a healthy forest, the vegetation that's further down is not as dense, and it's harder for those flames to get up into the canopy of the trees. And so what we need to do is really get in and clear out the smaller stuff, create some space, and then fires can come, and we can introduce those fires in wetter months, which is what we need to do a lot more of, so that we keep that fire ladder down low in healthy shape. So, gosh, this is turning out to be a long answer. Sorry about this, Jonathan. But
No worries.
on the climate side of your question, um, we've got to do a whole lot way beyond forest management. I mean, we got to tackle decarbonizing the entire economy in less than 10 years. That's a big, big task. And I have spent the last couple of years serving on the Climate Select Committee and developing a climate action plan that, for the first time, tries to provide a roadmap on how to do it. You have to look at the whole of the economy. You have to look at the whole of government. You have to look at the global aspects of this, our trade deals, and there's a lot there. So I think maybe if you have more specific questions about that, I'm happy to go into that. But you know, I could end up chewing up an hour here on a climate treatise if I'm not careful, and I don't want anyone's eyes to glaze over.
I doubt they would. We're a lot of people in this class are very conscious about the environment. But I did want to ask you in sort of a hypothetical, I guess, if a Republican majority continues in the Senate, how would you address these climate issues then? And then do you believe it would be much more difficult?
Oh yeah, it'd be a lot more difficult. No doubt about it. It would be really hard for the next president, if it's Joe Biden, to get good climate champions confirmed into cabinet positions if you've got a Republican Senate. You would continue to have difficulty getting good judges confirmed, and so we could expect resistance and mischief from the judicial branch. And it would be almost impossible to legislate in any of the bold ways that I think we need to do if you've got Mitch McConnell still calling the shots in the US Senate. So what would I do? I don't like to think about that scenario. It makes me very depressed. But I think what I would probably do on November 4th, if it looked like Mitch McConnell was still going to have the Senate, is I would start working on an outside game. I think you look at the state and local leaders and how the state of California can just leverage the hell out of all the tools that it has. You look at litigation. You look at corporate stewardship and private sector leaders who might want to get out and work with others around the world. Some of these Fortune 500 companies have supply chains that are just massive, and they have the ability to drive solutions. It's not ideal. You would work in kind of an activist way with, shareholder activism and, the shaming of these companies that are continuing to be part of the climate problem and divestment, things like that. So it's a different toolbox than if you actually have the presidency and the Senate and the House, and you can drive home some really good legislation. We may have to do all of it anyway. So, I don't like to think about it, but those are some of the things that I'd be working on if we had Mitch McConnell around.
Understandable. Now, moving on to a different issue. What is your stance on the current immigration situation, and what would you change? And if anything, or if you could elaborate on the DACA students and Dreamers.
Yeah, I think that's the first and maybe most obvious thing that we would do is we would keep faith with our commitment to the Dreamers and make permanent their protective status so that they would have a path to citizenship and wouldn't have to worry about deportation. I'd like to do a lot more than that. And I think the real question is, do we kind of do some piecemeal immigration reforms? And we might be able to do some agricultural stuff, might be able to do some visa reforms, or do we try to do the big comprehensive fix that we were very close to having, gosh, about 6 years ago, when a big comprehensive bipartisan bill passed out of the Senate. I mean, the Dreamers are great. It's important, but we have something like 10 to 12 million other people in this country who need to have their status addressed as well. And I would like to provide a legal status for them. That was done in that Senate bill of 6 years ago. And I'd like to at least try to get back to that. We'll see what this election brings, but I think there's a chance.
All right. Another hot button issue right now in terms of 2020. How do you find common ground between people who have lived experience with police oppression and brutality, and what do you believe about, or I'm sorry, how do you feel about those who deny its existence?
Yeah, that's a great question. So common ground, I think, starts with people like me and people that look like me, um, talking a little less and listening a lot more to that lived experience that you're referring to. And so
Mm,
I've really tried to do that. And even in Congress, when it comes to, how we're going to legislate on police reform, I think this is a moment that really needs to be led by the Congressional Black Caucus, and they have done a great job of that. So I've been really proud to kind of take a back seat to their leadership and just support them in any way I can. We passed a bill called the George Floyd Policing Reform Act out of the House. Now it's gone nowhere in the Senate, but it's a really good piece of legislation, and it addresses a whole bunch of the systemic reforms that we've talked about for years but never been willing to actually do. Things like qualified immunity and other things that keep bad cops from ever facing accountability. That's really the kind of stuff that is needed right now in this moment. And even beyond police reform, the other aspects of systemic racism and just finally tackling this original sin of our country, I think just requires those of us who have lived white privilege, and I have to be at peace with the fact that I have lived white privilege, and frankly, I'm probably seen as the embodiment of patriarchy by a lot of people, and maybe I am. But I can still do good things in the office that I hold, and I'm just trying to really bring some humility and some listening skills and a resolve to make a difference to those issues.
wow. Sorry, that took me aback. I really loved that response. uh, not moving on, but another question that I have that's sort of related to systemic racism and police brutality in some respects. What does it say to you that there has been a resurgence and just a general rise in comfortability of people being white supremacists and the resurgence of white supremacy and hate groups across the country?
It's disturbing. It's distressing. What it says to me is, for one, we were not quite as evolved as I thought we were. I was part of the millions of people that crowded into the mall and swore in Barack Obama as our first black president, and you really had a feeling that we had exorcised some demons and we were moving on to a new place, and it just wasn't that simple. So what Donald Trump has done is really provided a reality check that there's a lot of hatred and racism that is still with us, way more than I wanted to acknowledge. And he's been a little bit of an accelerant. And unfortunately, he's probably spawned a new generation of haters and racists, because young people have seen him these last 4 years as they begin to form their views on some of these things. And he's just been a disaster in every way. So we got a lot of work to do. And I think our challenge is we need to do it without, you don't ask nicely for people to stop being racists and to stop doing all these awful things. You demand it. But you've got to do it strategically. You've got to do it peacefully. I firmly believe that the model of John Lewis and MLK and others who were really disciplined in their activism and in their actions is the only way to be effective and the only way to drag our country into the future.
Sorry. So my final question for you, and this could, and out of all the topics that we have discussed today, or any that we haven't discussed, what is the most important issue to you personally at this time?
Well, I think climate change. I do, because I think it's the one thing that is existential here. As far as I know, we've only got one planet. So, all these other things, we have time to keep working on them. even if we have a great economic recession, we can build back and find new jobs, find other jobs. We can't find another planet, and we're really at this moment where it's do or die. So I realize I've got a limited number of years left that I can devote to this cause. I want to pass the baton to your generation in the best possible way. And I'm feeling a heck of a lot of urgency to get things done. And then you're going to have a lot of urgency too, because if my focus, maybe generationally is trying to get us to net zero emissions by 2050, all the science tells us we've still got to go negative after that to save the planet. We've got to draw down carbon. And we haven't even invented some of the things that we're going to need to make that happen. So the pressure won't let up for the next 30 years and beyond to tackle this thing. It's going to be what all of us are working on for a long time to come.
Wow. All right. That is the last of my questions at this time. I think we are going to open it up to the entire Oak Leaf staff now, right, Anne?
Yes.
All right.
So thank you very much. Some of these students are working on election stories. I'm going to go to James first, and otherwise they just want your take on other issues, or they might want to follow up with some of what you said. So James.
Yeah, howdy, Congressman. So just a few weeks ago, we had Newsom signing an order banning sales of new gasoline cars by 2035. I was just wondering how you felt about that, whether it's too soon, too late, et cetera.
No, it's certainly not too soon. I like it a lot, and it matches up real nicely with our climate action plan from the Select Committee. We recommended ending sales of or actually requiring only zero emission vehicles by 2035, only zero emission trucks by, I think it was 2040. So we're just going to have to do it. Now, the good news there is this is really doable. So as audacious as it might seem, the industry is ready to deliver on this. And if anything, we could probably even speed it up a little if we wanted to.
Thank you. Excellent.
I also have a question.
Was that Stephen?
Yeah. Hi, Congressman. How exactly does that gasoline car banning by 2035 bill, how does that solve the problem of existing gasoline cars on the road?
Yeah.
After they sell the cars, you'll still have all these thousands of gas-powered cars on the road and stuff.
Yeah, no, you're right. It doesn't solve that problem. And so there's other ways that you can address that. You can, start pricing carbon so that as they buy their gasoline, they're paying more and more over time. You can look at what we sometimes call a cash for clunkers initiative, where you would pay people to buy new cars. And when you get to that point where all new cars are really clean, you're getting, a great dividend on that investment when you help them buy a new car. You're probably going to need to create a bunch of other new incentives to retire those older vehicles and get people into newer vehicles. So we've got 15 years, I think, to turn the screws and make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't mean though in 2035 that we won't still have fossil fuels on the road. You will have fossil vehicles probably still on the road for some time to come. And we just need to retire them as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to jump in and ask, I'm writing an article on people who choose not to vote during elections. And as we approach this upcoming presidential election, I was just wondering if you could share some of your thoughts on why you think people choose not to vote in these really important elections.
Because they are at best confused. I mean, there's no rationale that's valid for that perspective. It is a wholly invalid and illogical and really destructive way of thinking. And the best example I can offer you for why that is you all know that Russia is working very actively to destabilize our democracy. They have figured out in recent years that it's pretty easy to do, that for a lot less money than, spending money on a massive military, they can just wreak havoc in the United States by sowing discord and misinformation and doing mischief online through these GRU troll farms that they create. It's a real thing. And the fact that even the Trump administration's intelligence agencies are briefing me on this and sharing with me their intel that says this is real, it's happening. Just know that it's real. Now, what do they want people to do? Exactly what you are writing about. One of the messages that they just push out on social media wherever they can is, this is all so screwed up, we should just refuse to vote. They love that.
I was going to oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to mention that I've been hearing a lot from people I've been gathering sources and information from, that they're choosing not to vote in this upcoming presidential election because they feel oftentimes their votes don't really count, especially with the fact that we have an electoral college. And I've heard a lot that that's what actually contributed to Trump's win back in 2016, was people just assuming their votes didn't count. And so I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on people who assume votes don't count?
I just don't know how they can think that way. It seems to me to fly in the face of everything we've learned in all of these high stakes close elections in recent years, is that your vote does count. Now, maybe some of those people are incapable of thinking as part of a community. Maybe they think only, that if I alone sit out this election, my single vote won't decide who's president of the United States. And while that might be true, it's really missing the point that we have a responsibility to act together as a community, and together our votes make a huge difference. So it's a real dangerous way of thinking. And even when it comes to that notion of an individual vote maybe not swinging the difference, I sure know a heck of a lot of local races and even some congressional races that came down to a handful of votes where it really did make a difference. So it's not valid.
Well, I really appreciate your response. It's very thorough. And I 100% agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Congress Huffman, for being here. And then first of all, I wanted to address that California essentially is the 5th largest economy in the world. Although we are heading for a recession, we have made our way very financially in this nation. But at the same time, if you also look at the things implemented within our society, they are not nearly up to par as what they should be. If you look at governmental help with Medi-Cal or welfare, if you look at our school systems, how it's $15,000 tuition for a UC, and yet we still have minimum wage at $12 and inflation just keeps ever growing and ever rising. I feel like there's a lot of money that we do have or that has been recklessly spent. How would you say that we are going to try to reallocate that funding, especially in military personnel, especially with our police system and the police brutality that's been going on recently?
Yeah. So I think part of your question is California, for all of its wealth and clout, has a lot of problems. And I do agree with you. We've got a lot of infrastructure that's neglected and that needs work that we can't afford, can't figure out how to pay for. We don't invest enough in education. You talked about the cost of higher education. And California, while we have the richest people in the world, we also have one of the highest poverty levels in the country. So, our housing crisis and, all the things that you folks know all too well. I don't think there's a single thing I can offer that would fix all of that, but I think we're going to have to find the political will to tackle all of it. I think the equity issues on housing will really challenge us in a place like the North Bay, where our quality of life is really important. We probably don't want to open up all of our open spaces to subdivision building. So we're going to have to be real smart about where we put our housing and try to make sure that it's affordable, try to find ways to subsidize it as needed. we're going to have to invest in public transit, even at a time when no one wants to ride transit. And that's a real tricky challenge for us, because it's going to be another year, I think, before the public has enough confidence in serious numbers to get back on BART and SMART and even buses and other things. And yet you can't just turn all that infrastructure off and mothball it. You've got to keep it going. And that's really expensive. So there are no simple answers to the challenge that you've asked about. I think California, certainly by virtue of our wealth and our innovation and the industries and universities and other things that still make us great, is up to the challenge. But it is not going to be easy.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the response.
Thank you.
Okay, who is next? Lauren.
Yeah, if no one else has a question, I'll go. Hi there, Congressman. I live out in West Sonoma County. I live in the Redwoods, and I'm only a couple miles from where the Walbridge fire was threatening Guerneville. And so when you're talking about private lands, or the difference between raking the forest and federal land versus out here in West County, it's a lot of private land. Yeah. Right. And so it's concerning. And what I want to ask you about is sort of the intersection between the fires and climate change, but also homelessness, because West County is also in the midst of a homelessness crisis. There are a lot of homeless individuals and people who deal that are even to say homelessness. They don't really even want to be homed. They don't want help. And where I live, specifically in Monte Rio, in the past 36 hours, we've had 2 vegetation fires started at homeless encampments. Yep. And so my question is sort of, how do we in California deal with not only climate change, but also this power that the individual liberty that we hold so strongly as Californians, where we can't force people off of the street or out of the forest, and yet how do you see the balance? Because I'm having a hard time envisioning how we balance those individuals' liberty and really choosing where they want to live with the rest of us who could get burned down because somebody tries to cook something in the woods 150 yards from my house.
Well, you folks are not bringing any easy questions to me in this conversation. This is high level Gordian knot material here. So, your question, I think, brings in one of these many ways in which our competing values of individual liberty versus the community. So individual freedom versus our collective freedom. I mean, there's so many ways in which the fault lines of our country are in a constructive tension with each other. And this is another one, and the mental health aspect of it is front and center. I believe we certainly never want to go back to the time of massive forced institutionalizations of the mentally ill. I mean, that was kind of a dark period of our past where we had these massive mental hospitals, and people were involuntarily put in there and sometimes forgotten about and abused. And our notions of due process and even of enlightened mental health care have evolved a lot from that. So on the other hand, there does come a point where things they have to be involuntary, because you mentioned it. There are folks who will just refuse to get treatment, and they can become a danger to themselves and others. And so it's a conversation that's overdue in California and at the national level as well. There are all sorts of privacy and other complex values that are wrapped up in it. But I actually have come to the conclusion that we got to provide some mechanisms for forced mental health treatment, for forced substance abuse treatment, and for some court supervised mechanisms that would put teeth in all of these well-intended efforts that we've tried now for a number of years, and they're just not working for the chronically and the dangerously unhoused. I think we're going to have to do that. Now, the good news is most of the people who are homeless can benefit from a much softer touch. I mean, if we just do wraparound services and give them what they need and get a roof over their heads and get them the treatment and the mental health support, and we'll need to stay with them because often it is a lifelong need. But you don't need to do the heavy-handed stuff. For a few, you do. And unfortunately, those few can cause something, like a terrible disaster when you get into the conditions out in West County with the Walbridge fire. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some of the things I think about.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I know it's sort of a tough question to answer, right? Because there isn't a talking point necessarily that can answer the question. But I do ask because, it's important to me to hear your opinion. And when, I'm standing in the middle of the night on Bohemian Highway with my neighbors, like wondering what's going on, and then hearing from our fire chief that it's the same homeless encampment. And then the neighbors are like, that guy, we've tried to help him many a time. You have to wonder, right? Like, how do we solve this? What do we do?
And the tools we have right now are just not up to it. I mean, they've done the 24-hour holds and all the other things that they can do under current law, and they don't work.
Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Peyton, and then Liam and Maritza.
I also have a question after them.
Sorry, I know that I already talked, but stemming along the idea of mental health, I feel like that is a topic that is extremely taboo in this country, and we like to prioritize, I guess, police enforcement in order to control situations, whether that be domestic abuse, whether that be physical violence, whatever the situation may pertain to. But at the same time, we rely so heavily on our police force in order to do a lot of the things that I don't want to say it, but I don't think that they are suitable to do, such as especially rigorous mental health evaluations and just how to handle those situations properly. So that kind of brings me along to the question of defunding the police has been a conversation that has been spurring a lot amongst young generations. And, it's just really not instilled in this country, or at least not up to par to where it needs to be in order to really make some, I guess, progressive changes. So do you think that defunding the police would help reallocate those funds into more progressive situations, such as mental health clinics, more evaluation centers, just more progressive systems in order to help people who are homeless, who are mentally ill?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And I'm sorry, because you had alluded to that in your previous question, and I didn't really say much in response. Here's what I think. I don't like the term defunding the police. I think it is a little misleading. I think it's not what we need to do. It's not what most of us are trying to do, but reform the police, heck yeah. And reconsider our priorities when it comes to public funding, heck yeah. I mean, if that means reallocating a lot of what goes to police now and putting it into frontline social services and investments in communities that can lower crime rate, create opportunity, I'm all for it. I just think defunding the police is a loaded term that doesn't advance really where we're trying to go with this, where most of us at least, even in a place like Minneapolis, where defunding the police really got a lot of traction, and you saw the city council talking about it. They weren't really trying to get rid of the police. I mean, we're always going to have police, and we just need to be real about that. But we should reimagine policing. And I totally agree with the notion that asking police to be social workers is crazy. I do like community policing. I like police to be, have sensitivity training and know how to work with different communities. That's really vital. But they're not social workers. We need social workers to be social workers. And, to give you an example of something that I worry about, I'm the father of an autistic son. And, there have been all kinds of examples where police have no clue how to work with developmentally disabled people that they encounter who might be agitated and afraid and stressed. And, their use of force escalates and really rotten things happen, tragedies happen. Sometimes there's a racial element to it. Sometimes it's just they don't know what to do because they're police. So I think I agree with you, a lot of what you're suggesting. I just would drop the term defunding the police and try to focus on reforming and reinvesting in other ways.
So would you say, instead of defunding the police as being a head slogan, because I know that's the term that's being rotated, what would you suggest would be a more progressive term to try to integrate, or at least be more?
Yeah. So I think reimagining policing is really important, and reprioritizing our public budgets. Those aren't very sexy terms, I know, but that's what I think we need to do.
Thank you so much.
Liam, I think, is next.
Hi, Congressman. I just wanted to go back to the question of not voting. What would you say to people who are choosing not to vote in this election, as they believe that both presidential candidates represent U.S. imperialist interests and both don't really provide solutions for free healthcare and education?
Where to begin with somebody who would say that? I've encountered people who say things like that, and there definitely is a time to go after the entire establishment in the country and to really challenge Democrats and Republicans alike. I don't think this is one of those times. I think we're at a very existential moment for whether we're going to continue to have a democracy. And to say that, Democrats are no different than Republicans is deeply ignorant in the face of what we're really living through in this moment. One party wants to continue a flawed but really great democratic republic that we can all work together on making better. The other country wants to take us down the path of authoritarian fascism, and we won't ever have that luxury. Believe me, talk about enjoy your advocacy against imperialism when Donald Trump consolidates his authority and becomes, your next dictator. I mean, it is not going to be pretty. And that's the moment that we're in. So I get a little frustrated when I hear people kind of indulging in those critiques in a moment like this. Let's get past the election, and then let's go after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Let's hold them to super high standards, but let's do it while we have a democracy and while we have a rule of law and the tools that we need to work with. Our country has never been perfect. It always has needed to get better. But to throw away all the tools that can make it better at a moment like this is just profoundly missing the moment.
Maritza.
Hi, Congressman Huffman. I am writing an article on California Proposition 16, also known as the repeal of Proposition 209 Affirmative Action Amendment. What are your reasons for supporting Proposition 16?
Yeah, so you folks may be way more versed on the propositions than me. I just got my voter pamphlet, and I'm embarrassed to admit, even as a U.S. Congressman, thank you. I see one right there. I haven't read it all. So I got a little homework that I need to do. I've been kind of battling Donald Trump and other things. As a general rule, I think we continue to need affirmative action. And, we talked a moment ago about systemic racism and just some of the ways in which our country is a lot less evolved than I hoped it was a few years ago. When California passed that proposition previously that did away with affirmative action, and when the U.S. Supreme Court issued a very controversial 5-4 decision that basically said we don't need certain voting rights protections anymore because we no longer have, racism and voter suppression. I think we've learned in recent years that those were just wrong, that it's still with us. And sometimes you hear the term reparations used in this conversation. I'm not in favor of figuring out how we can write a check to everyone and pretend that will kind of transactionally resolve our problems of racism. But I do think reparations has an important root word of repair. We've got a lot of repair to do. And so I am for reparations in the sense that we've got to look, I think, really creatively through our institutions, through our public policies, at how we can finally do the repair work that we have neglected for many years. And so I'll take a look at that proposition, but if it is repealing that previous proposition and reinstating affirmative action as a grounds for admitting people to UC and CSU, which I think is what it is, I'll be for it.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Oh, did you have a follow-up, Maritza?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So you like how you briefly mentioned it in your last part, how it's basically kind of affecting the CSU and UC admission. Do you have anything else to say, like, on your take on how it affects the CSU and UC admissions?
I need to familiarize myself a little more with it, but I know that they've done some creative workarounds to try to kind of create sparkle points for diversity so they continue to have a diverse student body. But it used to be that they could look a little more numerically at setting goals and kind of measuring progress, and I think they should be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. Would you accept a position in a Biden cabinet? And if so, what would be your chosen position?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I really like what I do now, and I am maybe one position away from chairing the House Natural Resources Committee, which was what I wanted to do when I ran for Congress back in 2012. That was my ultimate goal. So I'm really pleased at, being where I am and having the chance maybe within the next few years to hold that gavel and chair a major standing committee in the Congress. It would have to be a pretty good position. And I think the only one that I'd really say yes to would be Secretary of Interior. And I don't think it's going to be offered to me. So I guess kind of back to this point of white privilege and just where we are in this moment, I am at peace with the fact that I am a straight white male in a moment where diversity really matters. And I think they're going to be looking to fill a lot of these positions with women and people of color. And I think that's a fine thing. It's okay.
Okay, great. Would you care to comment on, I guess, Trump's COVID experiment at the White House over the past week? His joyride outside the hospital, taking his mask off, telling people not to fear COVID. Would you like to comment on this debacle?
Yeah, I can't find strong enough words really to describe what an idiot I think Donald Trump is and how poorly he behaves. It's as if he wakes up every morning and thinks about how can I be the worst possible role model in the world? And then he tries to do those awful, terrible things every single day. It's disgraceful. And, when he got COVID, I try to not just be consumed with hate and all of these, all the negativity that he invites. But even in trying to extend sympathy to a guy like this, it's hard to do because he never stops lying. And the one thing that's clear is he's brought this upon himself. And he's bringing it upon everyone else so recklessly that I'm just not going to waste my breath extending sympathy to him. I am going to focus on the damage that he's doing every single day. And to me, what it says these last few days is just it's more important than ever to vote this guy out in a huge landslide and try to send the message to our country that we can never go back to this kind of a nightmare again.
Okay.
So my question is kind of going back to Peyton's thing about police reform. I've noticed that San Francisco has a plan to reform the police and have social workers respond to mental health crises and have police only respond to criminal calls, and they'll just in fact hang up 911 on people who are reporting petty neighborhood issues and stuff. And that to me sounds like a very good step forward from the current police institution. Do you think something like that could work on a statewide or even national scale?
Well, I think you're going to have to pilot some of these innovative strategies and prove them up. But, I think it's tricky. I don't know if there would have to be coordination between these, social work resources that we need a lot more of and police, because, domestic violence is a good example. There are domestic violence situations where you absolutely need a policeman to protect the victim and to make sure that people don't get hurt. And there's other situations where you absolutely need mental health and counseling and substance abuse and the other things that are probably, totally viable solutions. But you got to know which is which, and you have to have both resources, I think, available. So I don't know. I think we're going to, the great thing is we should see communities doing some real innovative things in the years ahead. And I think we ought to be able to learn a lot from them. And then the ones that work, we should absolutely try to scale up at the national level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I believe Priscilla has a question.
Yeah. So,
and I see Zaire with his hand up earlier too. So.
Oh, okay. I cannot see him on my screen. Okay, Zaire is next.
Okay. Congressman Huffman, what is your take on the Prop 21 on the California ballot, or the affordable housing one?
Yeah, I'm sorry you got me again. I haven't done my homework. I'm a bad voter right now. I'm probably going to be casting my ballot in just a few days, and I need to study up on that.
Okay, that's all right.
Zaire.
Hi, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Congressman Huffman. So earlier you said that you don't support reparations. Were you talking about for enslaved people's ancestors were enslaved? You don't believe in financial reparations for them? And if so, why not?
Yeah. So I actually, I tried to say I do support reparations. I just don't support a monetary solution to reparations. Reparations, again, to me, reflects the root word repair. And I think you look at what are the best ways to repair all the damage of racism. I think sending some dollar amount out to everyone based on some formula doesn't do it. And probably won't be politically viable anyway. So I'm much more interested in fixing the root causes that continue to be with us, with our institutions and our policies. And I think that's the repair work of reparations that we need to do.
Okay, and if you don't mind me asking, what does that repair look like, considering that just yesterday another African American was murdered by the police? How do we begin to repair if we aren't thinking, oh, hey, maybe we should give money to the people that help build the country and are being murdered?
Well, look, if somebody is being murdered, they need money. I want them to get the money. That's why I'm supporting police reform that takes away qualified immunity and lets them sue the cops that put their knee on their neck. So I know that there's a time and a place where money is part of the way you do it. I just don't think an automatic send a check to everyone is the right strategy. You asked what would be the right. We've talked about police reform. We've talked about affirmative action. There are other ways in which I think you need to look at hiring and other policies. You need to look at implicit bias training in all sorts of fields, not just policing. So, I don't have all the answers to that. I'm going to keep trying to listen again, led by my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus. But I think those are the best tools to get at this. And look, getting more people of color into office, into positions of leadership, into private sector, corporate boards, and all sorts of other things, and really meaning it and doing it instead of just talking about it. One of the things that we've changed in the House of Representatives, in the Democratic caucus at least, is implementing something we call the Rooney Rule. And those of you that are football fans may know the Rooney Rule was meant to address the fact that you don't have a lot of black coaches in the NFL. You should, because there's plenty of talent out there. And so it was meant to sort of be a forcing mechanism that requires NFL teams to interview as finalists a certain number of candidates of color. And we've looked around at our staff in the Democratic caucus of the House, and we've realized we're not as diverse as we need to be. And so we're doing kind of a Rooney Rule ourselves, where you have a forcing mechanism that will, I think, help. But it is a whole bunch of things, I think. And I'm going to keep listening for good ideas.
Thank you, Priscilla, and then Mike.
Hi, Congressman. You previously alluded to fears of losing our representative democracy to possible right-wing authoritarianism and fascism at the hands of Donald Trump. What would you say to those on the center of the political spectrum who may have more fears towards far-left communism and anarchism?
Well, the anarchism is not a real thing. I mean, this is a construct of right-wing media and of Trump that somehow Antifa is like this really widespread, powerful thing. It's not. In fact, you can't even really find any actual human being that is Antifa. Now, there are violent left-wing nihilist activists that sort of like their counterparts on the right just want to go and get in fights and do damage, and people like that will always be with us. They'll be with us in street protests. They'll be with us in celebrations after a World Series victory or a Super Bowl victory. That's just crime, and that needs to be dealt with as such. But I don't think there's a valid basis for being afraid that the United States is about to slip into either anarchy or that we're somehow on the verge of being communist or socialist. There's a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of what those terms even mean on the right. I have colleagues that throw it around all the time in Congress, Republican colleagues, and if you challenge them, they really can never back it up. What is socialist about what we're doing? And by the way, why do you feel so great about the Veterans Administration, which is a total socialized medicine? It's the largest healthcare agency in the United States, and it's 100% socialist. So, there's a lot of loaded meaning that people attach to these terms, and we're just going to have to demystify them, kind of one at a time, I think. But it's just not a real thing. We're not on the verge of socialism or communism, and certainly not anarchy or nihilism.
Thank you.
We are on the verge of fascism, unfortunately. That's a very real thing, and that's a very real threat. Yeah.
Why would you think it is a real threat? I'm just curious on your thoughts behind that. Thank you.
So it's a real threat because if you look at the precursors of fascism in places like Germany and Italy and other places, you sort of check all the boxes with this administration. It's all there. You have an authoritarian kind of strongman leader. You have him attacking the free press viciously. You have him putting out massive, reckless propaganda through state media organs. You have him badly undermining the rule of law and putting political operatives in the Department of Justice and in the courts and in other places so that the law becomes this thing that you use to punish your enemies, but not something that you actually have to comply with. That's like the ultimate hallmark of fascism and dictatorship. And then you have this wrapping all of it in religion thing and the way he's tried to weaponize religion. That photo op, that stunt he did at Lafayette Park was a perfect example where it all rolled into one. All of these sort of badges of fascism, including militarization, rolling out the army troops and the Joint Chiefs, having General Milley in his fatigues walking with you with that Bible to the photo op. That's crazy stuff in this country. And even Milley had to realize that and apologize for it. But, these are all the hallmarks of fascism, and they're really happening right now in our country. I guess I do want to kind of alarm people a little bit about this. I don't want to be gratuitously alarmist, but it's real. This is real. This is our Reichstag fire. If any of you have studied 1930s Germany and know how Hitler came to power, he came to power through democratic institutions. He became the chancellor. And at that point, he created a bunch of some fake events, this Reichstag fire, which he used to say that God was sending a signal that his enemies needed to lose power. He needed to consolidate power, and it was time for the National Socialists to take over. And people went along with it. I see us just dangerously walking through some of those same steps of history right now.
Thank you for your response.
Mike?
Hello. So I'm doing an article on Measure P, and to keep it simple, about like 5 years ago, measures were put in place to make an independent organization, to make the sheriff's office accountable for their actions, just to an independent organization. And Measure P is on the ballot basically because the measures put into place have no teeth, and they need more authority over the sheriff's office. So just really wanted to ask, I know you probably answered somewhat kind of this question, but do you have any idea to make some sort of independent authority that the police just have to answer to, and to give them some sort of consequence to their actions?
So, Michael, I have endorsed Measure P for a lot of the reasons that you just said. And, you know, I don't often get into local ordinances and local elections. I try to stay at in my federal lane, but I think this is a moment, we've talked about a lot of this just in our time together, where you really have to be willing to make some changes institutionally if you're going to tackle the accountability and the systemic racism that continue to be problems.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Let's see, who did I say was after Mike?
Tucker, then Michaela.
Tucker. Yeah, Tucker, you're up.
Hi, Congressman. I know you said you kind of weren't too keen on the propositions this year, but I'd like to maybe get your thoughts on Proposition 17 and why we should give convicted felons on parole the right to vote again.
Okay, sure. So again, I'm going to need to do some homework, so I reserve the right to be corrected if I get any of this wrong. But I guess my feeling is if people have served their time, I see no reason why, as part of their we obviously believe in rehabilitation. In fact, the Department of Prisons in California is called the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And if you believe someone has paid their debt to society and you want them to rebuild their lives, why would you not allow them to vote the minute they walk out of that prison? I mean, to me, it just seems obvious.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michaela.
Hi, Congressman Huffman. My article is going to be on Proposition 25. I know you said you don't know too much about the propositions, but it has to do with bail, and we're changing our bail system. We're trying to.
Bail. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering, like, what your opinion is on that proposition.
No, thanks. And that's where I can tell you generally the policy of cash bail is a very bad thing. I mean, it discriminates against poor people. It discriminates against people of color. And so it's a little bit like the previous question. You know, I think these policies, whether deliberately or not, have been ways in which the establishment continues to suppress the rights and the voting participation of people of color.
Thank you.
All right. Who else? Is there anyone who hasn't asked a question yet who has a question? And then anyone else have a question?
I've got one, and sorry, I can't turn on my camera.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, my name's Eric. I wanted to ask, it was earlier, you're kind of talking about Donald Trump and his threat to democracy and the devolution of our governmental system into either proto-fascism or just full-on fascism. I'm wondering what your response is to people who say that Donald Trump isn't necessarily the biggest threat to our governmental system, but rather that Donald Trump is a symptom of a larger overarching process that's been in place for years and years. And while obviously we do need to treat that symptom, we need to get really into the gears of how he came to be in the first place.
Well, here's what I would say, Eric. I think Donald Trump certainly reflects a lot of things, a lot of problems that were there before Donald Trump. He's been described by some as an accelerant. But when it comes to this fascist threat, it really is about the one kind of strongman cultist leader who has those tendencies, and if people are willing to follow him, will act upon it. And so he is different than other figures we've seen. And that's why, I'm kind of pleased as an American to see all of these Republicans, even very conservative Republicans, kind of stepping away and saying, I'm going to be with Biden this time, even though I'm a Republican and I don't like voting Democrat. Our country's at stake, our democracy's at stake. That's pretty refreshing and encouraging that level of patriotism still exists across the aisle in this country. I think what Donald Trump has exposed is that we have a system that relied way too heavily on norms, on these sort of soft values that were not really codified with teeth in them. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do if we survive the threat of Donald Trump a few weeks from now is we're going to have to codify a lot of these things that we've always taken for granted, that a president would never, fire a special prosecutor in the middle of investigating a crime against that president, or a president would never dangle pardons to all their friends in order to deflect from, criminal investigations and accountability for that. There's just all of these different things, that a president would hide their own tax returns when they reveal not only tax liability to the IRS, which this president now controls, but also hundreds of millions of dollars in debt to foreign creditors that are going to come due under the president's next term. I mean, we're going to have to just lock in real meaningful legal teeth to make sure that we're not just counting on the goodness of human nature and norms and good behavior in the future, that we've got rock solid laws to protect our institutions.
I see. That's insightful. Thank you.
Peyton.
Sorry for running my mouth, part 3000, but this was going back to the fascist concept, and I really liked how you addressed that, because I feel like the concept of fascism isn't anything new, but rather it's just been catalyzed, especially by this pandemic, because now people are starting to realize, oh, this is more of a systemic problem. This is more of a societal, cultural problem. And I think a lot of that actually resides within our education system. And, being an English major, I've read my fair share of literature. I've done my fair share of history. And I feel like a lot of the times we're reading 40-year-old history books with very gentrified information. And of course, winners do write history, but at the same time, I feel like it removes a lot of culture and other perspectives from our society, and predominantly from our education. It's like, if you look at African-American culture, if you look at Asian-American culture, everything's been kind of tweaked and removed from our society, which is why I feel like this concept of, oh, well, fascism is kind of starting to go in this way, because Trump, he's a strong speaker, he's confident, even if he's outrageous, people are drawn to the essence of him. But at the same time, we're also lacking a lot of the cultural and fundamental values of other people, because they haven't had their voices heard, or matter of fact, they've been removed from our history books. And so I feel like Trump's now trying to scapegoat people of color, particularly as like the enemy of the nation, which is also really terrifying. How would you suggest that we're going to kind of try to reform our school systems, or at least try to integrate a more open and culturally accepting viewpoint in our society? Because right now I feel like it's very pinpoint, like, yes, let's just stick to the European history that we've known for the past X amount of years.
It's a really interesting question, and I'm glad I've had a little extra time this afternoon, because I'm enjoying my conversation with you folks, and glad I didn't have to be cut away. This is it's fun to think about these political science-like questions. So I think we're sort of in a battle for the, we got to re-win the Enlightenment, right? I mean, we kind of clawed our way out of the Dark Ages through the Enlightenment, and this country was founded by, Renaissance thinkers, like Jefferson and Madison and all of these folks that represented, and there were others like them throughout Europe that believed in, critical thought and things like, crazy radical things like the separation of church and state, and the ability of man, woman, and man to think our way through problems. And we're sliding backward right now. Look at what Trump is doing on education. I mean, he just did this crazy executive order last week or the week before to call for patriotic education, which is exactly the kind of whitewashed stuff that you're talking about, this airbrush history that does not include the darker chapters of our past and the honest telling of, you know, cultural and racial and other perspectives that are part of our story, that have to be part of our story. So I think we are going to have to fight for the things that allow people to develop their minds and think critically. Now, I respect whatever your religious sensibilities are in this group. You know, my novelty, I guess, in the Congress is that I'm the one openly non-religious member of Congress. I'm a humanist. I don't have a theistic view of the universe. And I do think that one of my criticisms and concerns about this administration is I don't think for a moment Trump is a religious man. I don't think any serious person thinks that Trump is religious, but how cynically he has weaponized religion and tried to impose it. And when you get into these things like mandatory school prayer and some of the stuff that Bill Barr is talking about, which is really a Christian nationalism, and it's not a huge leap to go from that stuff to some of the darker things in literature, you know, Fahrenheit 451 and Orwell and all these other things, because it's a dulling down of critical thinking. It's a stifling of information, of the free flow of information and accountability, which is critical to critical thinking. And I think in some sense, that's the fight we're in right now. Will we have truth? Will we have the ability to think for ourselves, or will we be forced to say a certain type of prayer anytime that we're in a government building or in a public school? You know, will we have this whitewashed education shoved down our throat, or will we just peel all our tax dollars off and send them to private religious schools like Betsy DeVos wants? And then you're really off to the races with this kind of stuff. So I have no idea if I answered your question, but I had fun ranting about it for a little while, and I thank you.
Separation between church and state is basically not applicable anymore, so I appreciated the rant.
Don't you have like a heavy Catholic being nominated too to the Supreme Court?
Yes.
You do, and I'm good with Catholics. I'm married to one, and I'm supporting the Catholic guy for president. So it's not an anti-Catholic thing, but you know, this push toward theocracy is kind of a scary thing. And it does trouble me that I've heard Judge Amy Coney Barrett say some things. Now, she has said she'd never let her religion, you know, affect the way she interprets the law. But on the other hand, she said she thinks that her work as a judge is about building the kingdom of God, and that her work as a judge is a tool for promoting a Christian worldview. I get nervous when I hear stuff like that, because I don't think that's what being a judge should be about. I don't think that's what our system of laws should be about. I think, if anything, judges and laws are there to protect us from anyone imposing that kind of stuff on us.
I was wondering, this kind of ties to what you guys were saying really, really quickly. What are your thoughts on the nation's Pledge of Allegiance being one nation under God? I was just wondering if you could.
I never
don't
say
it.
Little secret
I
here.
can agree with you there.
Little secret here. When you see me on the House floor, I'll say the Pledge of Allegiance, but I go mom at the under God. That was added in the 1950s during the McCarthy era. Like so many other things, it is un-American to require anyone to declare an oath or, you know, make some sort of a religious pledge. It's unconstitutional. It's un-American.
Great. I think Stephen has a last question. I know you probably need to get on with your.
I know. I'm in deep. My staff's going to kill me for taking so much time with you guys, but I love the conversations.
Yeah. No. Well, we'll keep it to one last question. Then I have one last question about this recording. Stephen.
All right. This is a little bit of a hypothetical, but should Trump lose the election and should that happen, do you think that his GOP allies will turn their backs on him and try to convict him, or do you think he's going to get off scot-free legally?
I think the size of his defeat matters. I think if it's a really close election, I'm very worried that even if he loses, he may he may not allow the transfer of power. And that's why this Supreme Court nomination is so critical. He's all but telling us, Trump always says the quiet part out loud. He's all but saying, I expect this election to get resolved by the Supreme Court, and so I want to get my person in there. If you don't understand what he's up to there, you're not paying attention. The way this will work with the Electoral College, if it's close, is that Trump will try to declare some claim of victory based on the in-person voting on either election night or the day after. And then what he'll try to do is get his allies in states that have a Republican governor or a Republican secretary of state to stop the counting of ballots and to allow legal challenges by Republicans to work their way up to the Supreme Court so that you just don't count any more ballots. You come up with these bogus voter fraud arguments. And I don't think any of this is going to succeed, but I think this is what he's going to try to do. And, there's a real chance. If you take a look at the state of Florida, that's a lot of electoral votes. I can't remember exactly how many, but 26 or so. If this is a close election and it swings on Florida, we're in trouble, because Ron DeSantis is a total political operative, and the courts in Florida are stacked with political operatives, and the Secretary of State is a political hack in Florida, and they will absolutely engage in dirty tricks. And then you got to go up through the federal courts, starting with the federal courts for that region that are very conservative. You're going to get bad initial rulings. And if Amy Coney Barrett is on the court, I'm worried about what that looks like. So that's why when you hear people say, we got to run up the score in this election, that's what they mean. We got to win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, maybe Ohio, a bunch, Arizona, a bunch of other states, so that it's not down to just Florida and the Electoral College, which would be a real scary scenario. Now, here's the other one to really keep you up at night. If there is no winner in the Electoral College, and you can go to Real Clear Politics and build your own map and play around with different scenarios, you can come up with something where neither side gets to 270. You may not know this, but what happens under the Constitution is the next Congress in January, the House of Representatives will vote on who should be president, and they vote based on state delegations. And so California gets one vote. Wyoming gets one vote. It's the same. And it's really not a great scenario for us. Right now, Republicans control state delegations in, I think, 26, a narrow majority of states. So there's a bunch of congressional races that could swing state delegations.
That's pretty scary.
And yeah, it's really the stuff that crazy novels and movies are made of. But stay tuned.